5 Minnesota high schools recently broke ground or are about to, and all of them were designed by St. Paul-based Wold Architects and Engineers, one of whose partners, Vaughn Dierks, joins us to discuss these projects and trends in K through 12 education design. Welcome, Vaughn.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Vaughn, I'm curious, was it just a coincidence that these high schools are starting to break ground so suddenly together or simultaneously, or was that planned?
Well, it's probably more coincidence than anything else, although we found that certainly there's topics and trends in education that tend to move certain groups of projects forward. A few years ago, we had a push towards all day, every day kindergarten, and that prompted a lot of looking at elementary schools. But right now, as we look at more personalized learning approaches for students, more involvement for exploring careers and technical trades, people are looking at the high schools and saying, we need to do a better job at rethinking how the high schools serve our communities, how they serve the students, and how we can better prepare students for the future.
What are some of the ways that a firm like yours can help us, a district get its schools up and running faster? I mean, everybody's talking about speed to market these days.
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest problems is that most school districts, no matter what state you're in, you're usually running a referenda to ask voter support for building new schools. And so it prevents you from overlapping design with that referenda question simply because it's too much of a financial risk for a district to do that. So we've taken a look at some of the other shortcomings with educational design and construction, mostly the summer construction schedule. There's only certain months out of the year that you can actually do work when students aren't in the building, or with bad weather, which many states in the US suffer from. We're limited to summer construction. So we've said, how can we improve phasing? How can we look at phasing of these projects if there are significant additions and renovations to move students around the building, build in some extra capacity so that you can be doing year-round construction for a lot of that. We certainly looked at design build as an exploration model, although that requires you to be a little bit more rigid in some of the design process. You can't revisit some aspects once you've got footings and foundations in place, because that makes things a little bit more challenging. I think in the future, we'll probably also see prefabrication, certainly of elements and components of construction being a big driver. Wall systems, whether they're interior or exterior, could help speed that process up, as well as, quite honestly, improve the quality level. You have more control in a prefabrication setting than you do on the site oftentimes.
Are you doing any prefab right now?
We are using components in the system. We've talked about, could you design a school, for example, that's 100% prefabricated, but it leaves out some of the customization that we think is really important to specific communities. We never treat a school as a one-size-fits-all model. The topics are similar, but how you address those for those communities are a little tough, which also weighs into the design process. You want to take the time to make sure you have buy-in in the communities for what the schools are, which you could short circuit that certainly and do things in a vacuum, but that really cuts the community out of the design process. And so we're very cautious not to do that.
I didn't ask this question when I submitted some questions to you, but what do you make of this newfound interest in public-private partnerships for schools? I guess there was one that was done in Texas last year, and now there's a guide that's helping school districts approach their financing that way. What do your firm have any opinions about that?
We're not seeing it in our markets currently, but I think that it's a really good and interesting idea. I think, oftentimes just the process we go through of trying to be something for everybody when you're dealing with referenda approaches makes it a little bit more challenging to finance a project. I think that we need more partnerships at all levels in the schools to get students and their families and community members what they need. I mean, these are significant investments for them. And so having more private entities, whether it's providing services to the schools or different educational experiences, opportunities for students to go deeper into something that's an interest of theirs, is a good thing. We're certainly seeing that with some of our other business units, both government and healthcare, working together with schools to provide health, human services, social services to students and families in need as part of that one-stop shop, if you will, to move all students further forward, get all students to the same starting point so we don't have students starting at a significant disadvantage from where others are. So I really think more partnership discussion, relying less on only the government or only school districts to take care of things is something we have to look at seriously in the future.
Mhm. From a design standpoint, what are some of the must-haves for high schools these days? What are the districts asking for that are, what's the common thread?
I think the biggest trend is it's really when most people think of schools, they think of what they went to school in, classrooms, labs, both sides of a hallway, and it really isn't that model anymore. That was an industrialized model, and what we know now about students, and whether it's us as designers or educators, is that everybody learns differently. There's lots of different learning styles, and lecture-based instruction at a classroom is only one style. It doesn't mean we won't have classrooms in the future, but we need a wider variety of spaces, of smaller learning spaces, conference rooms, the ability to study things individually. And so it's going to look a lot less institutional in all spaces. Cafeterias, for example, instead of having one large dining hall cafeteria, spaces that are more designed around zones so that they can be used for different hours and different activities during the day. Small group instruction happening there, or the community using those spaces at night for more programs. I think that community access is a must-have, especially as voters say, I don't have kids in school, or my kids have graduated, so what's in it for me? How can I access those spaces more readily is a big part of the must-haves for schools. Certainly in Minnesota, synthetic turf is part of that conversation. We only have a few months out of the year that our grass playing fields can be utilized, and they get beat up pretty quickly. And so the synthetic turf model allows for a wider variety of spaces. And overall, we've seen such a huge improvement in furnishings and technology over the last decade, and we'll continue to see that, especially with technology, that flexibility of those environments can really change a building even without modifying the architecture in terms of what students need. I mean, honestly, I think the biggest thing that we found over the last year to 18 months, and what hopefully the broader community is finding, is that we don't have to go back to the way things were. We learned too much about how education can be delivered in a wide variety of formats. Yes, people want students back in school, but do they all have to be sitting in classrooms and labs? I think there's still going to be students that want to learn at their pace, whether it's faster, slower, and whatever that learning style is, and having the right types of spaces in high school to accommodate that is a big part of what that must have is for the future.
When you mentioned that last point, are we moving towards an era of eliminating or minimizing grades? I'm talking about grades like 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. That you don't want to. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that you are going to probably see a greater evaluation and less stigma around spending more or less time in a certain area. I look at education as sort of a mirror of what's going on in society. And if you look at the way entertainment is delivered, there's a lot of binging on demand services.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm a student that wants to spend, I get math, I'm going to do that quick. I can go through the content, I can test out of it quicker and binge it. And I need more help with maybe my reading or my social studies types of things. And I want to spend more time talking about that with an instructor, or maybe it's just, I want to spend more time in the lab spaces that I'm working on. I really like doing science labs and experiments, and I want to take that further. I want to spend more time in the art lab. So can I test out of my generals quicker and spend more time over here? I think that flexibility can expand into, you need a little bit more staff time here, and it's going to take a little bit longer. Let's see what we can accelerate in some areas and focus on in other areas. So I think you could see a lot more shifting around that. And we already see some of that, quite honestly, with looped grading. The Montessori school system is set up around that idea of you move at the pace you're set to move at. And so I think that it's going to broaden out that conversation. It's less about everybody's the same, all testing is the same, and more personalization to get people the services they need.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to give you the opportunity to go through each of the 5 projects that you've designed and maybe give me, a little highlight about each of them.
Sure. Let's see if I can capture this. So the first one that I'd maybe talk about would be Owatonna High School. That's one of the brand new from the ground up high schools. That one is a community that has got a lot of really good industry, a lot of strong professionals there, a lot of pride in it. And the high school that they were in 100 years old. It had a historic building, but it also had some other spaces that just didn't quite match for what they wanted for their community. And they really saw it as an opportunity to reinvest and redefine who they were for the future. They built the entire design process around career pathways, if you will, really giving students the opportunity to explore in depth what their interests are. It doesn't lock them into a field. Say medical is the career pathway that they're on. Doesn't mean that that's the only thing they can do, but they can go deeper into it. And so the entire school is designed around those aspects. Mora High School, another new one, a little bit more of not rural community, but a little bit further out from the metro. They had a similar approach, and they said, we really want to focus the high school on 3 different aspects. We have our classrooms and our lab area, but we're in an old traditional building right now that's been added on to 8 different times over the last 60 years. And it's a labyrinth and a mess. How can we reinvent that? And the first thing they said is, we really don't see a need for the media center anymore. We've already had to cut that position. What do we do with that space? And so we reinvented everything around how the classrooms and the labs are organized. They said students can self-check out the books. Well, let's distribute those through the building. The other area they had was their career and technical education. They said, instead of just having this be shop-based, we want students to explore post-secondary options that aren't college, if that's what they want to do. And so they brought their business program there. They reinvented their facts around food services and the food industry. They have their more traditional shop spaces, construction, metals. They brought nursing into that area.
Wow, that's interesting.
Agriculture, and said, we want a hub. We want the students to feel like they've arrived at Disneyland. Infringing on the trademark there, but they said when they come in here, we want to have it be on display. We want students to look around and go, oh, this is fascinating, and realize that all of those different trades are somewhat organized together. So I might be doing something in the food services industry, but I need to design a menu. I need to have some business aspects to that. So really helping students understand that as that part of the school. And it's such a huge, again, a community driver. They wanted their community engaged in the school, and so we want to move some of our passive education that the students do, that flexible learning, out into those common spaces, so that the community, when they're coming in for performances in the new auditorium, the gym, they can see those spaces as well. And those could be like lobby spaces for those areas. So they really thought about how they integrate those 3 things in the school. With White Bear Lake High School, that was very interesting in that as opposed to a 9th grade through 12th grade structure that most high schools have, they had 2 campuses, a North Campus and a South Campus, with 9th and 10th at one building and 11th and 12th at another. And said this, we really will find more benefit to the students if we have them all together. There's a camaraderie that happens, older students helping take care of younger students, better programming options for everybody in the full spectrum as you look at what courses are offered. But that's a massive high school, and bringing that together. And it involved demolishing significant portions of one building and completely expanding it much larger than what the other building was. And so that's a big part of that challenge, is how do you unite those 2 separate communities into one new community, bringing it back together to what it once was in that town. And they're working with a very complicated addition renovation strategy for that, which is similar to Tartan High School. The other 2 high schools that we're working on are both part of the same district, ISD 622, which is North St. Paul, Oakdale, and Maplewood. And part of their district-wide initiatives, it was a major referenda to overhaul the district and look at how education is delivered from elementary through middle school and up through high school, and deal with equity so that all students had a similar experience. Tartan High School was the older high school of the 2. North High School had been built in the 90s. So we're actually demolishing the completely inflexible circular round towers that the classrooms and the media center and cafeteria were in Tartan High School, by constructing a new, much more collaborative and flexible learning space for those areas. Then once that's up and occupied, demolishing the front towers, very complicated phasing approach for that, and then adding onto the front to the building and bringing it up to what would be contemporary educational delivery methods. North High School, although it was built in the 90s and still thought of as the new school, it didn't have those flexible spaces. And so while it's a smaller addition and renovation project, it was really designed around, what are we doing at both buildings? How do we get them both equitable so that it's no longer a this building was built 20 years earlier than that building was, and this one has more features than that, and really trying to get everybody to the same type of experience. So no matter which high school you go to, you have a similar experience. They all 5 of them have very similar tenets and beliefs around that: flexible learning, personalized learning, more focus on career trades, no matter which school you're going to, and really helping students dive deeper into where their passions lie.
Mhm. Lastly, Vaughn, how does your firm view the future of K through 12 education from the standpoint of designer? Are there any trends or ideas that you'd like to try out that maybe you haven't to this point, or have maybe experimented with a little bit?
Well, I think we touched on a few of them. The idea of
Yeah.
how can private industry enhance what that experience looks like? What does a broader model look like? I think while we've been designing spaces and having these types of conversations with districts over the last 15, 20 years of my career around personalized learning and flexible learning types of spaces, I really think that if you look at what are the good things that come out of the pandemic, is it's a greater awareness that education is a tough job and students are all going to learn different. Hybrid is a different model, but why do we have to lose the good aspects of what came out of the last year and a half, and how can you do those in schools differently? And I think that there's a greater awareness that our infrastructure, much like our horizontal infrastructure with roads and bridges, of our school systems really requires a lot of investment. We need to do a better job at making sure that the spaces our students go to are the same quality and level as the spaces we work in, the spaces we live in, the spaces we entertain ourselves in. And this last year has shown how much districts do above and beyond just educating children in terms of the services that they receive. And so I think those are going to be continued topics that every district has moving forward. How do we reinvest in the infrastructure buildings? How can we make buildings last longer? And then some of the issues, the unfortunate issues, safety and security, violence issues in the US around our schools. We're still going to be addressing those in the most constructive ways possible. So we're not designing schools that are just lockdown. They still have to be educational environments first and foremost. And so how can we do that and integrate safety and security into the schools will be a continued topic. So I think it really just is an evolution of the conversation, and hopefully that there's just a greater awareness for what's happened over the past year and a half that now will allow us to move forward in a positive way.
Vaughn, thanks for taking a couple minutes to share your thoughts on this. This has been
Absolutely.
quite interesting.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, great. And this is John Caulfield from Building Design and Construction. Thanks for joining us.